President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso recently returned to Ouagadougou after a landmark diplomatic visit to Moscow, where he took part in Russia's Victory Day celebrations and held strategic discussions with top Russian officials. More than just a ceremonial visit, Traoré's presence in Moscow symbolized a bold realignment in Burkina Faso's international posture, a clear and unapologetic departure from Western alliances toward a multipolar world order rooted in sovereignty, dignity, and genuine African self-determination. However, what should have been a victorious return was overshadowed by a diplomatic scandal that has ignited outrage across West Africa and beyond. According to sources within the presidential delegation, President Traoré was subjected to overt disrespect by a flight attendant during his journey back to Burkina Faso, an incident that many are calling racially charged, politically motivated, and emblematic of a broader pattern of contempt toward African leaders who dare to challenge Western dominance. Eyewitness accounts allege that the flight attendant's behavior was cold, condescending, and calculated. Rather than affording the courtesy and protocol typically reserved for heads of state, the attendant allegedly spoke to President Ibrahim Traoré in a dismissive tone, ignored his basic requests, and acted as though his presence was a nuisance rather than that of a visiting world leader. For many observers, this was not simply a lapse in professionalism. It was an expression of deep-seated racial and ideological prejudice. Though President Traoré has not made a public comment on the incident, those close to him confirm that he remained composed and dignified, refusing to engage in confrontation. He did not flinch. He did not respond in anger. He chose to stay focused on his larger mission, one delegate said. Yet his silence should not be misinterpreted as acceptance. Across the African continent, voices are rising to condemn what they see as yet another reminder of the systemic disrespect faced by Black leaders who resist the neo-colonial order. For Pan-Africanists, the incident is no mere insult. It is a symptom of a global system that still refuses to treat African nations and their leaders as equals. Imagine for a moment a European or North American head of state being treated in such a degrading manner by airline staff. The diplomatic fallout would be immediate and severe. But when it comes to African leaders, particularly those like Traoré, who dare to speak openly against imperialism, the disrespect is either denied, downplayed, or quietly normalized. This affront comes on the heels of President Traoré's growing defiance of Western geopolitical influence. Since rising to power in 2022, he has charted a bold new path for Burkina Faso, expelling French troops, tearing up exploitative military agreements, and condemning the persistent meddling of Western powers in African affairs. In their place, he has opened the door to cooperation with non-Western states, Russia, China, Iran, countries that, while controversial in their own right, have aligned themselves with the principle of African sovereignty and non-interference. Western media, predictably, has either ignored the incident or framed it as a misunderstanding, avoiding any deeper reflection on the racial and political undercurrents involved. But for many in Africa, this silence speaks volumes. It reinforces a disturbing reality, that in the eyes of the old guard of global power, the dignity of an African president still does not command the same respect as that of his Western counterparts, especially if that president refuses to play by their rules. President Traoré's calm in the face of provocation may speak to his character, but the outrage it has provoked speaks to something much larger. This was not merely a breach of protocol. It was a telling moment in the global struggle for African respect, recognition, and sovereignty. And the world is watching. Moscow rolled out the red carpet for Traoré. Russian officials welcomed him as a strategic partner, not a vassal. In meetings with top Kremlin advisors, Traoré reportedly discussed military cooperation, infrastructure development, and agricultural projects. Russian state media praised him as a brave and principled leader standing up to imperialism. For many in Burkina Faso, the images of Traoré walking alongside Russian dignitaries during Victory Day commemorations were not just diplomatic photo ops, they were acts of political defiance. And herein lies the controversy. Traoré's critics, particularly in the West, have tried to paint him as an autocrat cozying up to authoritarian regimes. But among his supporters, both at home and across Africa, he is hailed as a liberator, a young revolutionary unafraid to challenge a global system built on centuries of exploitation and domination. That the reported incident occurred during a flight on a supposedly civilized and neutral commercial carrier only adds insult to injury. The airline has not publicly addressed the matter. There has been no apology, no investigation announced, no acknowledgement that an African head of state may have been racially and politically profiled. The silence from the airline industry and international diplomatic circles is deafening. The episode has sparked furious debate online, particularly among young Africans who see Traoré as a symbol of generational resistance. They fear him because he refuses to kneel, one Burkinabe student tweeted. That disrespect was not for him alone. It was for all of us who believe in an independent Africa. Despite the provocation, Traoré's return to Ouagadougou was met with cheering crowds and patriotic chants. The president addressed the nation not with bitterness, but with renewed commitment to his vision for a sovereign Burkina Faso. The struggle for independence did not end in 1960. It continues today, against corruption, against dependency, and against the mental chains that still bind us, he said during a public appearance at a youth empowerment event. Since taking office, Traoré has launched sweeping reforms aimed at building internal capacity. His administration has prioritized local agriculture, invested in youth-led initiatives, and cracked down on corruption within the civil service. More controversially, he has also tightened state control over foreign NGOs and media organizations accused of acting as proxies for foreign influence. These moves have drawn criticism from international human rights groups, but have been widely popular among Burkinabe citizens who view them as necessary to restore national dignity. The mistreatment of President Traoré, intentional or not, may well prove to be a tipping point. Across the continent, African leaders and citizens alike are demanding not only political sovereignty, but also respect on the global stage. If a head of state can be disrespected mid-air because of his skin color and political stance, what does that say about the supposed equality of nations in the international system? The message from Burkina Faso is clear. The days of passive diplomacy and silent humiliation are over. Traoré's calm in the face of provocation is not submission, it is strength. His continued pursuit of partnerships based on mutual respect and sovereignty is not isolationism, it is liberation. As he returns to the work of rebuilding his country, one thing is certain: President Ibrahim Traoré has become more than a national leader. He has become a symbol of defiance, pride, and the unyielding African will to be free. And if that unsettles the global establishment, perhaps it's because they know he is not alone. Moscow rolled out the red carpet for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, not out of formality, but out of strategic respect. The young president of Burkina Faso, long vilified in Western media as a populist or strongman, was welcomed in Russia not as a subordinate, but as a peer. Russian officials treated him as a partner in shaping a new multipolar order, one that rejects Western domination and revives the dream of global equity. In high-level meetings with Kremlin advisors, Traoré reportedly discussed defense cooperation, infrastructure development, and food security. Russian state media praised him as a brave and principled leader who dares to confront imperialism head-on. For many in Burkina Faso and across Africa, the sight of Traoré walking confidently beside Russian dignitaries during the Victory Day commemorations was no mere diplomatic formality. It was a political statement. A sovereign African president had stepped onto the world stage, not to beg, but to bargain, not to receive orders, but to make them. The symbolism was profound. Traoré was not just representing Burkina Faso, he was embodying the Pan-African desire to sever the psychological and political chains of neocolonialism. And that is precisely what makes the incident on his return flight so explosive. According to credible sources, Traoré was met with open disrespect by a flight attendant aboard a commercial airline. Witnesses allege that the attendant treated him with cold indifference and barely concealed contempt, ignoring protocol, disregarding his position, and acting in a way many interpreted as racially and politically motivated. The fact that such behavior took place in the sterile, supposedly neutral environment of international air travel only deepened the offense. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was symbolic of something much deeper: the enduring global discomfort with confident, independent African leadership. The airline has remained silent, no apology, no investigation, no recognition of the magnitude of the disrespect. If this had happened to a Western head of state, let alone one returning from a high-profile diplomatic mission, the global media would be in uproar. But when the target is an African revolutionary who challenges Western orthodoxy, the world shrugs. Yet silence speaks volumes, and the youth of Africa are listening. Online, the reaction was swift and fierce. They fear him because he refuses to kneel, tweeted one Burkinabe student. That disrespect wasn't just for him, it was for all of us. Across the continent, social media feeds erupted with solidarity. Memes, protest art, and statements of support poured in, casting Traoré as more than a president, as a symbol of a generation refusing to be belittled. And still, when he landed in Ouagadougou, he did not lash out. He was met with cheering crowds, waving flags, and cries of "Liberté." At a youth empowerment event days later, he addressed the incident not with bitterness, but with resolve. The struggle for independence did not end in 1960, he said. It continues today, against corruption, against dependency, and against the mental chains that still bind us. Since assuming office in 2022, Traoré has launched sweeping reforms prioritizing food sovereignty, fighting corruption, and ejecting foreign troops from Burkinabe soil. He has tightened control over foreign NGOs and media outfits accused of covert influence campaigns. Critics in the West call these moves authoritarian. But in Burkina Faso, they are widely seen as long overdue steps toward dignity and self-reliance. And now, this incident, intentional or not, has become a flashpoint. It is more than a diplomatic faux pas. It is a mirror reflecting the ugly truth that global equality remains conditional, especially for African leaders who defy the status quo. President Traoré's restraint in the face of insult is not weakness. It is power. His choice to respond with purpose rather than fury reflects a deeper understanding of the moment. Burkina Faso is not retreating from the world. It is stepping into it on its own terms. And if the global establishment is unsettled by this shift, perhaps it is because they see the writing on the wall. Traoré is not an outlier. He is a precursor, a signal that Africa's new generation of leaders will not ask for respect. They will command it.